Welcome to Labor Matters right here on KBN TV, the finest television. We are live on GSTV channel 279, GoTV 27, Topstar 102, and live on our Facebook page, which is KBN TV. And today I'm super excited because we're looking at an important topic. Please do feel free to text using the number which is right on your TV screen. And what we are looking at today is a strategic HR for executives. That is what we are looking at today. I am your host as usual, Patricia Chilambikwa, and I am not alone in the studio. You might be wondering why is she talking alone. I'm not alone in the studio. As usual, I am joined by Mr. Owen Kabanda, who is our very own special person on labor matters, who helps us talk more about issues to do with employers and employees. Remember that Mr. Owen Kabanda is a management and leadership advisor, international speaker, I must make mention, and not forgetting neuropsychologist, in case you are watching us for the first time. Mr. Kabanda, welcome to Labor Matters.
Thank you so much. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well, and glad to be here.
Amazing. Yeah. To our viewers, please don't forget to follow Mr. Owen Kabanda on all his social media platforms. We're talking about LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook. If you want to have, such kind of conversations, which we usually have on Labor Matters. Mr. Kabanda, once again, we are glad to have you here, and we're looking forward to just have an interesting conversation.
It's my pleasure, actually. These programs have actually been very helpful. They keep me busy, so it's actually very nice.
Amazing. In the last episode, I must make mention that we did talk about the importance of a human resource. That is what we talked about, from the basic HR doing leave forms in the salary advance to strategic HR at a top management level. And we did receive quite a number of requests from the viewers that if you can just expand more on the strategic HR to just help them, those holding higher positions in HR, and maybe those that are working towards top HR management roles. So we are looking forward, me and the viewers are looking forward to just have you expand more on what you talked about last week, because we didn't have quite enough time. So this is it. Yeah, we did receive quite a number of questions. So before we go into the details of our topic of discussion for today, Mr. Kabanda, last time we did receive a text message from some people asking how you know much about the basic HR to strategic HR, but we did not have time, as I mentioned earlier. So if you can just take us through before we talk about a topic of discussion.
Yeah, so really for that aspect around even what we talked about last time in terms of basic HR, in terms of critical work, all the way to strategic HR. How do I know about that? Really, it's coming from a lot of things. First of all, my own studies. I have a degree in public administration, and so we really get to be exposed to some fundamental principles around HR. But more importantly, like I've said on this program, I started off my work in consultants. So in that space, it actually, when I joined Bitmas Human Resource under Mr. Nyatando, it's like my father in HR. You really go to every public, we did a lot of consultants for most of the big companies you can think of in Zambia, both public institutions and private companies. So that within a short period of time exposed me to learn a lot about the various structures, the systems, policies and procedures that are found in a lot of institutions in Zambia. So that gave me that really good understanding of the whole spectrum of HR from the basics. And then, of course, I've been working inside the actual operational HR as HR manager, and so you really get to practice and see things from the consultant's perspective. So that for me is really my background, and I know that question keeps on coming because yes, it's normal for like HR sometimes to be focused on one thing. Maybe you are specialized in compensation and remuneration, or you focus only on issues to do with maybe staff welfare, or you have a specialization in recruitment. It is okay, but I always encourage my colleagues in HR to actually try to go beyond one area, because when you are only in one area, yes, you can specialize, but at some point, and depending also on your long-term career plans, you would want to actually understand HR from end to end, especially if you're going to end up at a higher level, like you saying the topic for today. If you're going to end up as an executive or a senior or a director, you want to be able to sit at that space where you can look at HR from end to end. In that way, you can be able to advise your management, you can advise employees, your fellow managers, and it makes it easier to run HR like that. So that has really been my focus. Have I reached where I want to be? Not yet. So
actually, that was the question I was about to ask you.
No. We're still learning actually a lot. I learn a lot from colleagues. Like I even mentioned the other time we were talking about the conference in Livingston. I was there with Madame Mebo Ngomba, and we were having a conversation. I learn a lot in just how you present things, how you argue cases. You spend also time to learn a lot from a lot of other people, from the business perspective. How do you actually look at business? Because you need to be able to acquire skills and knowledge in all areas, from the psychology perspective, from the labor law perspective. So you have to be well-rounded so that even as you work with your colleagues, you can be able to be in a space where you're talking with information and not just using emotions. I
know you've probably talked about the importance of having HR in organizations, but if you can also talk about it now, because we still have organizations without HR. So what's the importance of having an HR in an organization?
Yeah, I know, even when we did that last topic, some people were saying, okay, now we hear what you're saying, that HR is important, but sometimes it's also a cost. So like for small businesses, maybe it's not so much necessary, especially at the beginning. Look, like we said, HR is extremely important. First of all, it's a regulated field in itself. So like we said, and that I really don't want to be saying much of what I said last time, you do not start practicing HR if you are not an HR practitioner. You have to be registered, you have to be licensed, you have to have your practicing certificate issued by the Zambia Institute of Human Resource Management if you are practicing in Zambia. If you are practicing in other countries, again, you have regulatory bodies that you have to make sure that you belong to. So HR is important in every country, in every sector, especially people who know what they're doing, because then you bring that balance between employees and employers so that you create this environment where people can actually work very well. It's okay to cut costs and not have HR. It's okay until you start paying for penalties. It's okay if you, as a business, you have said, okay, it's okay if my employees can come and go. I don't need to have plans and strategies on how to keep them. If you have told yourself, it's okay, I'm ready to pay penalties where I'm not compliant on certain things, it's okay. If that's a business decision you have made, that you want to go that way. But again, you have to see to what extent do you want to run your institution like that for, and for how long. So if you really cannot have an HR person in-house, you can always get these consultants that can also support you remotely, so that at least you have someone really focusing on HR matters. Otherwise, it becomes a big challenge to run a company without HR. People try that, but at the end of the day, the costs become higher, because even if you're a businessman, you find that sometimes you go into a raw deal because you didn't calculate the proper cost even for your labor. I know of someone who came to me asking, can you help me because I signed this contract, but now I'm not really making much, because after I pay salaries and NAPSA, workers' compensation and all these things, I'm not really remaining with much. That means somebody started that business without having taken into consideration the aspect of HR.
Well explained, Mr. Kanda. Now, talking about HR colleagues at officer level, I mean, these people are doing almost everything. Do you think they need to acquire skills as well needed at top management levels?
Yes, Patricia. Looking, like we said last time, we were looking at, critical kind of HR all the way to strategy. You have to really understand, and these are things that we discuss a lot with the HR colleagues. I've heard that argument a lot, where someone will say, no, you see, in my institution, I'm an HR officer, but you see, I do everything. Let's take away the title aspect. You can be HR officer, senior HR officer, or whatever it is, Because institutions also depending, and businesses depending on what they want, sometimes they'll give you a small title, but you're really doing a lot. But what I ask colleagues in HR is that, have you taken a time to actually understand the difference between an officer and a manager in terms of the knowledge that they need to have and the skills that they need to have? And that is really where things start to become differentiated. It is okay at a lower level where maybe you are running with the payroll, you're running with staff welfare, but you also have to start investing in terms of your time, your money, and whatever it is that it takes for you to build your capacity around how a manager thinks. A lot of colleagues who are on my mentorship program, we do a lot of these exercises because you have to be able to, a manager or a top level executive focuses on solving problems. They are looking at planning. How do you do your short-term, long-term plans? And then how do you resolve problems? Because when you're at a lower level, you'll be able to think, okay, my boss will, you pass it on to the boss, maybe they will think for you or they will make a certain decision for you. But you need to start acquiring those skills that allow you, because some people, maybe you have been an officer for maybe 5, 10, 12 years, you have to now start saying, how do I start acquiring management skills? Because it's a whole set of skills that you really need to have. How do you plan? How do you delegate? How do you actually get things done? How do you bring stakeholders together? Those things are very critical, especially as you go higher. So to the colleagues, for me, it's just an encouragement that invest in actually now starting to understand strategic HR at that higher level and not just at the implementation level. Remember, there's a planning stage and then there's implementation. So you can be an HR officer and somebody did policies for you, so you're just implementing. Or somebody made the structure for you and you're just implementing. So you really just follow those structures. Oh, the number, the establishment is 10, we have hired 10, it's very okay. But can you move out of the implementation and start thinking about the strategic level? How do you actually plan? How do you come up with structures, systems, policies? If you start really operating like that, then you have both the strategic and the operational aspects of HR.
Well explained, Mr. Kabanda. To our viewers, please feel free to send in your text messages. Remember, we are not receiving calls. So if you have any questions, comments about our topic of discussion for today, or you have a concern you want Mr. Kabanda to talk about right here on Labor Matters, all you have to do is send us a text message. We are not receiving calls. Send us a text message and we'll read it right here. Or better go on our Facebook page and drop us a comment. Mr. Kabanda, you being a management and a leadership advisor, what are some of the focus areas for HRs at that top management levels which they need to follow?
So at the top management level, there are a number of things that one will be focused on. Maybe I'll mention maybe the top 5. There are a lot of them, but key to it, the first one is strategy itself. So understanding the strategy. So what does that mean? I've said this before. So we have like companies, two different companies. One company that has a strategy, another company that doesn't have a strategy written. Let's talk about the companies that have strategies in place. First of all, as an HR person at top level, from the time of creating the strategy, you need to be fully involved. You cannot take leave, you go, okay, now there's a department that will make the strategy, because those are things that are going to affect you. So you need to make sure that you are getting involved. There are times, yes, HR, some people may, HR, we will give them when we finish the strategy, they are there to implement. No, HR cannot be there to implement. They should also be there to participate in the preparation and the development of that strategy, because then you start having a strategy that is actually practical, because you're now looking at the resources and everything. Apart from being part of, if you are an HR at that high level where you find that the strategy has already been approved, maybe you joined a new company, for instance, you then have to sit down and actually start reading that strategy and understand it like back to back, because you are now, there are things like even during trainings, when we are having HR trainings, you cannot say no because there is a strategy department that is involved in the running of the strategy for the institution. You as HR, you need to now understand that strategy back to back. What that means is you're now saying from the strategy, the strategic objectives, what do these strategic objectives mean to me as HR at that top level? You are now breaking everything down in terms of what, like we said even in the previous episode, what does this objective mean in terms of which department is doing what? You fully understand that strategy. You break everything down. It means also you start looking at your own people, your own systems. Do we have the right organization structures? Do we have the right policies? Do we have the right people to actually actualize that strategy? So it is at a very high level. It's not something like, oh, I'm just going to be implementing. No, you have to fully understand it, internalize it. And it involves also, talking with the various stakeholders, your own CEO, your governor, whatever the head of the institution, as well as your management. When you fully understand that strategy, the next level, you're now saying, where are the people? So now you're looking at your recruitment. How do you make sure that you bring in the right people? It is at that high level now. It's not just a matter of saying, oh, I'm going to stand there and I will invite general workers to come. We are talking of looking at the entire organization structure and saying, what positions do we really need and when do we actually recruit for these people? So at that high level, you are working out the strategy around recruitment. Now, this recruitment could be within the next 1 month, 1 quarter, 1 year, 5 years, or maybe 10 years. When do we bring in these people? And how do we actually find these people? And we are talking of the right people. So at the strategy level, there's a lot of work that is actually involved. And that's why, like we were joking last time, that you find that the top leadership, sometimes they are not available, they are in meetings, because you have to think, you have to plan. Yeah. You have to make sure that you have the right strategies to now hire the right people. It's not just anybody, it's the right people. Get the right people on board. Now, when you hire these people, the third issue to look at now is how are you going to retain them? Because hiring, when the people come, you should now start thinking around what strategies now do we put in place. So, whereas at the lower level, at the operational level, you find policies and you're running with those policies, you're implementing. If there's a staff welfare program, you're simply writing to say, oh, we need you people to jump on Friday. At the strategic level, you are saying, what policies should we have? So there is a lot of work involved now. You have to do benchmarking. You have to look at also your own institution. What ability does it have to pay for whatever you are going to propose as your staff retention strategy? You are basically saying, how do we keep the people? How do we retain them? Then you even work out targets. Maybe you are going to say, okay, we are going to keep maybe 90% or 95% of our staff around. Some people could definitely go. Yeah. It is okay. Especially if they are going on good reasons, like, okay, maybe they found something better in terms of payment and so on. But it's a big problem if they are leaving because you are fighting. So retention of staff becomes, at that high level, a plan that you have to now put in place. And that has to be approved because it carries with it some budget provision. You are going to start spending. How you are retaining people, it involves your conditions of service. You have to clean them up to make sure that it's speaking to those strategies. So at this level, there's a lot of thinking and planning that really goes on when we're talking about staff retention. Then when you keep these people, then what? We then now need to look at how do we get the best out of them. That means how do we manage their performance? In terms of this level, at level 4, you're basically now saying, what performance management systems do we have in place? Is it just, okay, I know we have been talking about appraisals, because a lot of times we are confusing performance management to appraisals. It's just with that December thing, people will sit, do appraisals. No, okay, you got 65, you got 85. That's not performance management. That's just appraisals. It's just a component, which happens at one point in a year. But we are talking about the entire performance management. How do you make sure that the employee from day one, they are properly managed? So at that level, it's very strategic. You are now putting in place systems. You make sure that management, they are trained. Because again, we can't just know everybody knows why we wake up. People are very different, Patricia. While you wake up to come and wake, somebody will be waking up to come and relax as they wait for the payment or the salary or at the month end. That's why performance management becomes very critical at that high level in terms of how are you going to manage the people. Also on top of that, how you're going to give them capacity to make sure that they perform well. That means the trainings that you have to think through. So there is a lot of planning at that high level. Lastly, it will be another aspect around how do you actually even separate with the people. I know that a number of people don't want to think about this aspect, but at a strategic level, you need to be very clear. What that means is that you put in place even policies and procedures way in advance. It's not by fluke or I woke up with it. No, if you're going to, somebody has to be dismissed, how do you actually go about dismissing them? And what are you going to pay them? If somebody is going to resign, what are you going to do? And everything is documented. And you make sure that any staff separation is really done in a professional manner. There's, like we have said before, this is just employment. There's no need to take things personal. So at the very high level, and very briefly in terms of the things that an HR at the strategic level will be looking at, those are the things that I can mention, but there are a lot of them, but those are key to make sure that you get people on board, you keep them properly, and you separate with them properly.
Now, Mr. Kabanda, with your works in big and local international corporations, which we've seen, would you say that understanding the strategy is enough for top HR management, or they need also to understand how to deal with the key stakeholders or other things?
Yeah, so when it comes to really at the strategic HR level, yes, understanding the strategy is very key, because that is now going to be what will drive how you manage the institution. Remember, the institution now is like your baby. You are going to make sure that this baby is nurtured, and you are really, and that includes your CEO, management, and all the employees up to the lowest level. They are like now your babies, to make sure that you take good care of them. Now, having understood the strategy, like you said, there are a lot of stakeholders that you have to really think through and think about and have plans. The board, for instance, like I mentioned last time, is a very critical, the board is very critical for you at that top level. Maybe an HR officer will not even know who is the board member, but of course it's a requirement that they will know, because they will interact at some point. But if you're an HR director, head of HR, or head of people, or whatever it is, the title that you are using, at that high level, what is expected, for instance, is that you have an understanding of your own strategy. You interact with the board and the board members, both in the formal setting, through the committees of the board, where you are going to make presentations, but also you are also interacting with the board members, even at the personal level, on one-on-one, whenever situations or opportunities present themselves. What that means is that you start creating a relationship with the board. But this is not for purposes of canvassing, which we were talking about the other time, where someone has to run to the board to cry about something. No, that's not the purpose which we are talking about. At that high level, you are talking strategic things, meaning that you are having this proper relationship with this board, so that you understand where they want the institution to go. And most of this will be in resolutions. But also sometimes the board members, they can tell you certain things. Okay, like we would like this company to start going this way and that way. By you understanding the board members, it becomes easy for you to actually implement certain things. Also at the same time, with that interaction with the board, you then at that high level can help them to understand maybe even your limitations as an institution, to a point where they can start approving certain things for you. This business, like we said before, as a head of HR in an institution, at a strategic level, you cannot be hiding. You cannot say, no, the board members, they will just be interacting with the CEO. Unless they are the ones who have told you never to interact with them. Then that is understandable. But at the end of the day, we encourage at the strategic level, be there with the board members, so you understand what they want, and even you make them understand your own limitations, your resources, so that at the end of the day, you are moving very well. And that even helps management itself. The CEO, yourself, and the top management, you again need all of you to understand how the board wants certain things done. Then as an HR, because you also have other stakeholders being the other managers, you have to at that level also understand the interest of your managers. If they are having performance issues, how do you help them? If there's disciplinary issues, how do you help them? You also have to understand the stakeholders who are below in terms of your employees. So there is that need really at a strategic level, because one of the things that start to happen, if some section of stakeholders, they are really not so happy with you, and you have been very good with one part, it starts to even affect even your stay in that institution. So understand that at the high level, there's a high expectation of in terms of your interaction with the stakeholders, the board. It could even be government institutions. You have to understand how you work with them. Even if you're in a private sector, there will be government authorities that will come maybe for inspections, or Ministry of Labor or whatever. You have to find a way to work well with them. We talked last time about even stakeholders like the traditional leadership where you're operating. You need to be able to work very well with those traditional leaders or political leaders or whatever it is, because at the end of the day, what you want is the stakeholders to support you and the institution so that the institution can then deliver on its mandate. That is what is very critical.
Mr. Kabanda, I must make mention that the strategic plans can be 3, 5, or maybe 10 years or more. Yeah. Now, can you say that HR can plan for that long, or maybe should we just work with annual work plans and budgets?
No, I know that from the HR perspective, yes, sometimes it can be very difficult to make the plans. But if you really understand what you need to do, you can work around your weekly, your monthly, your quarterly, your annual plans, including the long-term plans. And that is actually what we encourage. So at a strategic level, because we are talking of strategic HR, and this is the thing that we also encourage even colleagues in HR. You need to start thinking, how does that, remember we talked about the strategic plan, how do you make sure that this long-term plan can actually be actualized? So you will start by understanding where you're going as an institution. Then from the HR perspective, you now craft HR plans, strategic plans also aligned to the company, the corporate strategic plan. So from the HR perspective, you need to now sit down. And again, if you cannot do those things internally, you can always bring on board consultants to help you. You look at your own plans. Remember the plans around how you, the systems you have in place, how you keep the people, how you separate with the people, how you get the best out of them. There are all these plans that you have to put in place. You have to look at your organization structure.
Yeah.
So in terms of the organization structure, you're now saying the boxes that we have, we did touch on this the other time. Do these boxes or these positions actually speak to this long-term strategy that we have? That is a responsibility at a strategic level. It's not an officer's job. If you are the head of institution in HR, or you are top management in HR, you need to make sure that you look at those things, the structures that you have. You can start revising the structures to make sure that it delivers on the mandate of the institution. And now that you can do it internally if you have the capacity. Now this is where the challenge comes, because sometimes as HR, there's limited exposure to creating those things. And so you can bring on board a consultant. But if you can do it internally, then do it. But you have to understand the principles that apply to